Japanese heavy tanks are going to be the next tech tree added into World of Tanks Blitz. We already know about the tier 10 for quite some time now, being the Type 71. And yesterday I talked about the Judo, which is the tier 7 Japanese tech tree heavy. But in today's video, we're going to be reviewing the tier 8, the Chisei. This vehicle looks very, very reminiscent of just a beefier Chiri. It looks really cool though, and I'm excited for this tank to come into the game. Now this information I'm going to be sharing with you guys is not available on any other YouTube channel, and I always try to pride myself on getting information out as fast as possible. Later today, we're going to be talking about the tier 9 Japanese tech tree tank as well, so if you want to see that, make sure to click that subscribe button and make sure to stay tuned on the channel so you can see what that tank is going to be statistically like. Now, I will say that these statistics are very, very early on. These tanks are in super test. That is why this information is so crazy early, and that's why we have so many watermarks on these pictures, is because we don't want other people taking this and claiming it as their own. So yeah, that is why I'm really excited to share this information. But I do want to point out that because these tanks are in super test, the statistics and armor profile could be subject to change in the future. But at the same time, a lot of times we see these tier 8s and tier 9s tested, they really only go into the super test. They might have a minor change here or there, and then they are just flat introduced into the game without actually reaching the normal test client. We've seen that for tier 9s like the Object 84, the Vickers CR, and the T92E1, and that's why they've come into the game so incredibly cracked. But let's start off with the looks of this vehicle. As I said, it looks kind of like a wider Chiri. I honestly think Wargaming just got the Chiri file and stretched it, because this is a Chiri. Take a look at that turret, the hatch on the roof, the overall design of this tank. And then we just go back over to the Chisei. I mean, they look identical to each other, from the hatch on the roof to the overall flattened part of the turret, although I will say the hull is a bit different as it's much more angled. Now, the hull armor on this tank is amazing. I was looking at it earlier in a training room with an FV301. The only reason I can't show that is because I don't want Wargaming to actually see the battles I've played. So, this tank has a very, very strong upper plate. It's capable of probably bouncing a lot of premium shells, very similar to like a Tiger 2's upper plate, but just like the tier 7, the turret is the weak spot. An FV301 alone using Cali can penetrate straight through the turret even when it's fully hauled down. So you have to be extremely careful when showcasing the armor on this tank that you know who you are poking. Tier 8 heavies, and especially tier 9 heavies, will butter through your turret. If you're sitting in an IS-5 or really any Russian heavy Calion with 297 millimeters of heat pen, you are definitely going to penetrate this tank's turret. But the nice thing is that it does have that great hull, as I said. It's a really, really small lower plate. You can see it there hidden. So currently, to what I see, the armor on this tank will be pretty effective, especially against lower tiered opponents. If you're fighting tier 7s, there is no chance they're going to cut through your turret. But if you are fighting tier 8 heavy tanks that have enough pen, especially tier 9 heavies, you will be buttered through on your turret. I think that this vehicle will be much better exposing its hull, trying to bait shells out, than showing its weaker turret armor, especially with that hatch on the roof. However, that hatch won't be much of a weak spot when you're using the 10 degrees of gun depression this vehicle does get. Let's actually break into the overall statistics of this tank. Sitting at 1,855 hit points, nothing insane, but it'll be enough to tank shells from enemy opponents. You'll notice the main turret armor is 234, and that's just the flat bit on the front of the turret, so not the angle parts, but just this front bit right here. The sides of the turret are 105, which aren't amazing. That's this angled part here. So yeah, 105, even though it's at a very steep angle, won't give you a crazy amount of protection, and that's why you have to be very careful when showcasing the turret on this tank. But the hull armor at 203, especially at that very steep angle it's at, is fantastic. The side armor as well at 100 millimeters and 90 at the rear. This thing is not going to be HE-able anywhere, which is fantastic. Well, yeah, even the rear of the turret's 90 millimeters thick, so you're not going to be high explosive penetrated from really any rounds, unless maybe a charioteer or anything that shoots Hesh. But apart from that, this tank is going to be very beefy when it comes to tier 8 heavies, especially on overall armor. It's got pretty terrible concealment, even worse than the tier 7, but that makes sense because this is quite a large vehicle, weighing in at 68 tons, as you can see off to the side. These tanks are different than the Japanese Super Heavies on World of Tanks PC, but overall, I'd say they're pretty similar on their weight. I mean, these tanks are incredibly heavy, especially for this only being a Tier 8 heavy tank. The damage per minute on this tank is actually very solid. Now, this is with gun rammer, but 2454 DPM is definitely higher up there compared to the other Tier 8 heavy tanks. There's no really Russian heavy that sits up that high, so this is more comparable to a vehicle like a Tiger II's damage per minute with a 7.5 second reload. And honestly, you really won't need calibrated shells for this tank because its standard pen is already 215, very nice, but the premium is 265, and it again shoots AP ammunition for premium, just like the Tier 7. What other tanks shoot premium AP? Oh yeah, the Ho-Ri. This tank will butter through any Tier 8 heavy tanks, and if you're going to be like me, I'm going to try out Cali and see how it works. With calibrated, you'll probably get about 15 millimeters more premium pen, so it'll be insane. Having around 280 millimeters of pen, let's say, and then adding on the shell normalization of 5 degrees, let's say 310 millimeters effective, you're going to cut through any Tier 9, any Tier 8, and butter through literally all armor on Tier 7s. The gun on this tank is going to be ridiculously strong, but there is a bit of a downside. It doesn't have ridiculous damage per shot. It's only 310. So you got to be careful when you are using this tank that you're not getting out-traded by Tier 9s like the E75 or a lot of Tier 8s like the IS series vehicles. So it does have downsides, but I don't really think the damage is much of a downside because, as we went over before, it's got a really solid damage per minute. Aiming time is meh, 4.6 seconds, that's pretty poor, but the dispersion is much better than the Tier 7. The Tier 7 was sitting at 0.389. The dispersion on this vehicle is sitting at 0.344, so multiple times better. The aiming time's a tad bit better, so I guess we'll just have to see how the hidden statistics are when it is eventually released on the on-movement dispersion, because that will either make this tank really enjoyable or not really enjoyable. 10 degrees of gun depression, 20 degrees of gun elevation, making this tank flexible on really any ridgeline, any spot whatsoever. I mean, 20 degrees of gun elevation is insane, and the 10 degrees of gun depression is going to make it very strong as well. And when we take a look at the top speed, it's able to go 35 forwards and, 12 in reverse. This is like an American heavy. Unless this tank gets gear oil, it is going to be incredibly slow, and that really seems like it's going to be the balancing factor of the tank. It only has an average speed of 27, and its power to weight ratio is 12.8. Oh my, this tank is so slow. We don't know what the terrain resistances are right now. We have the terrain crossing capacity here, but the Blitz values are kind of iffy when it's actually compared to Blitzhanger and Blitzstar's values. So we'll have to see when this tank does actually enter the game how slow it truly is. But what I can tell you is it's going to be very slow accelerating, and in its reverse speed, if you put this tank into a position you are going to need the reverse out of, you might regret that because it is not going to be getting out of that spot very quickly. Its turret reverse speed is actually pretty fast at 26 degrees a second, and same for the hull traverse at 32 degrees a second. For a vehicle that weighs in at, as we went over, 68 tons, it's not that slow. So vehicles that are going to try and flank you thinking that this is a big juicy target, I do think that you will be able to flank it quite easily, but don't be surprised when this tank is able to outmaneuver you on its turret speed and actually get a shot in. So, this is the Chisei, the Japanese Tier 8 Tech Tree Heavy Tank. It looks pretty interesting, and wait until you see the Tier 9 later today, because that tank looks even cooler, and it also looks pretty well balanced, honestly. Overall, I would say that this tank does look pretty well balanced. I think if it came into the game like it currently is, the only thing I would change, just like I said for the Tier 7, is the premium ammunition. Instead of having 265 AP pen, either give it 265 heat or just make it like 240, because I don't know why a heavy tank would need this much AP penetration. Sounds kind of dumb to me. Either way, I think the tank looks pretty good. It looks very well balanced because of that terrible reverse speed and the weakness on the turret. So let me know what you guys think about the Chisei in the comments down below. But yeah, other than that, make sure to click that subscribe button down below. As I said, you will not see this information on any other YouTube channel for probably months to come. But other than that, I'll be seeing you in the next one. Bye-bye.